Thomas Aquinas is generally seen as a rather stiff figure. We encounter him mostly through his scholastic works, like the Summa Theologica, where he posits questions and then spends what feels like endless times debating himself. Yet there's a lot more to him than meets the eye. In fact, I would say that, along with Matthew Fox, that Aquinas is probably one of the most earth centered, creation centered theologians in the Catholic tradition. If you scratch just a little bit below the surface and see what he was actually talking about, aligns much more fully with creation spirituality than any of the other traditions that try to claim him. So let's talk a bit about St. Thomas Aquinas today as we walk together down creation paths. Hello, everyone. My name is Charlie, and I am a Christopagan druid and priest of Bridget.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brian. I'm a Christopagan druid and sous chef to the doctor.
Today, we're going to be talking about St. Thomas Aquinas, really giving the barest, just scratch the surface of his theology. I want to say right from the beginning, if you want to dig really deep into this topic, Matthew Fox actually has a couple books that you might want to check out on this subject, including The Tao of Thomas Aquinas, Fierce Wisdom for Hard Times, which is a powerful, powerful read that will challenge a lot of your preconceptions when it comes to Aquinas and his theology and really help you dig deeper in to his thoughts. And he has another book that I checked and I don't see it currently in print right now, also on the topic of Aquinas. But it really is a powerful book. You can still find it online. It's called Wrestling with the Prophets, Essays on Creation, Spirituality, and Everyday Life. You can still find it used. Aquinas figures in there as well as several others. And you can find other books out there. Aquinas really is a profoundly creation centered writer in so many ways. It's easy to get lost in the work that he did. What I think a lot of people would find most surprising about Aquinas is that throughout, though he's known mostly for his writings, towards the end of his life, he had a mystical experience that really challenged everything that he thought he knew. And as a scholastic who was trying to put everything into its nice, neat little boxes, it really did make him question whether or not that was even possible, and kind of decided that it's not really a worthy pursuit to be going after.
Or as I like to say, he found his way through the Hellenistic plot.
He did, because he was trying to, his entire magnum opus was trying to find a way to reconcile Aristotle with Christian theology.
Yes.
So literally.
And yes, literally that Aristotelian Hellenistic plot was plaguing him. And in the very end, after the mystical experience, he was able to realize, no, it's all good. It doesn't even really matter.
Spirit is so much more powerful than any of this. But before we get into any of that, if you haven't already, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, whatever the terminology happens to be on whatever app you're listening to us on. We do 5 original Christopagan and Druid episodes Monday through Friday, and you don't want to miss a thing. We've got a lot of juicy topics coming up. All right, let's get into it.
It's one of the things I find really fun where he called his writing straw in comparison to divine reality, because that's the thing. It's back to that both and. It's not that his writings weren't trash before that. His straw is still edible, like he uses feed for animals and stuff. It was used for bedding for a long time. It's not a nice steak dinner.
It's not useless, but it's not the most useful thing.
No.
I like to make pop culture references, and most of my pop culture references are owed because I'm owed. But my absolute favorite episode of Star Trek Voyager is an episode where Captain Janeway has to go through a religious ritual down on this planet in order to save a friend of hers who got basically punished by the spirits. That's what everyone's telling her. And so she goes down to the planet, and the first thing she's told is, all of this is meaningless. All of this is meaningless. And then goes on to put herself through all of these trials, these physical trials and just psychological trials and all of this stuff, being told constantly, throughout the whole thing, this is all meaningless. All of this is meaningless. All of this is meaningless. And she thinks that she's getting somewhere. She thinks she's getting somewhere. And then finally, towards the end of the episode, she realizes I was talking to the spirits the whole time. Oh no. And went back down and had to go back in and reapproach the mystery with that actual humility of, wait, you said that this was all meaningless and you meant it. And I get in a lot of trouble because I say that a lot, that a lot of our spiritual practices are meaningless. And it's not that they're meaningless, it's that they don't really mean anything. And it's not exactly the same thing.
Alongside with that, like in your example, where we feel we have to add all these extra things that don't have to be there, but because we insist on them being there, they're there. Like a lot of her, like the physical endurance tests and staying up for all those days and having to hold the rock and everything. They're like, look, you're doing this because you feel you have to do this. Do you need to keep doing this? And she's like, no, I have to do this. This is the trial.
I have to get to the end. I have to see
I
it
have to get to
through.
the end. I have to see it through. And they're like, you're already there. But
And
I guess you have to do those.
and I think that that is the grand overarching lesson of a lot of spirituality is there's the wonderful story told by the Buddha when he was explaining the spiritual path. And he said it's like a person who comes to the shore of a river and the river is moving so fast, he knows he cannot make it to the other side. So he stops and he takes the time to make a boat. And with great trouble and difficulty, he navigates the boat across this very fast moving river to get to the other side. When he gets to the other side, he realizes there was no river, there was no boat. I think a lot of spirituality is that way. We really see that exemplified in the person of Aquinas, who was born in 1220 and was a Dominican friar who dedicated themselves to this kind of intellectual work and labor. Remember, the Dominicans were founded to save souls. Like that is their one and only purpose in life. Saint Dominic himself, according to legend, receives the rosary in this very like Moses on Mount Sinai moment where he's in a storm and it's threatening to destroy this area that is just haggard by heresy. And he receives the rosary in this vision and he goes back to the church and starts praying with the people and he teaches them to pray it. And the storm dies down and they're saved not only from the storm, from the heresy by committing this act, right? This is the cornerstone story, right? In the foundation of the Dominican order. And so this really is that drive. Because this isn't very long from that. I think Thomas Aquinas was maybe a second or third generation Dominican. So he's not that far removed, maybe a few more generations, but he's not that far removed from that missionary zeal of Saint Dominic. And so all of his work is trying to find ways to convince people. How do you make the argument perfect? His magnum opus, the Summa Theologica, literally means like this is all theology. Like this is all of the knowledge we have of God. If you try to translate that from the Latin to the English, like this is to use English words that have similar roots. This is the summation of theology, right? This is it. I've done the thing. And for him to realize towards the end that what he had done was in fact not the thing, and that there was so much beyond his own words is profound. But even what was found in his own words, even what he included in his own writings is a huge thing. Even when he was in that mindset of having to work it all out, to think it all out. And I'm not belittling him. Remember, Paul says we have to work out our own salvation with fear and trembling. And that's what the Summa Theologica was for him. Thomas needed to do all of this intellectual labor to get himself to the point where he could have his mystical experience, right? And each of us have some work that we have to do to get to our own. But in the Summa Theologica, we find things like him saying, God's glory is manifest in all things. We see him talking about how the wisdom of God can be found in the simplest things, from the way the rivers flow and how the rain falls to how the birds sing and how they know where to go in summer and fall, and how they winter in one land in winter and come back in the spring, that we can learn so much from nature. He didn't fully succumb to this idea that original sin, which unfortunately he did kind of still believe in, cursed all of creation. So he still saw creation itself as good. He still saw creation itself as being able to bestow blessing and wisdom and knowledge upon us. He saw nature itself as a sacred text that we could learn how to read. I don't think he gets the credit that he deserves, because I don't think we would have modern science without Thomas, because Thomas makes it cool again to study the world in a way that we would eventually call scientific, right? He, in his attempt to reconcile Aristotelian thought with the Christian theology that had come his way, he is kind of crafting this idea of, if we rigorously and thoroughly actually study the book of nature, we can learn things that we couldn't know otherwise. He really does lay the foundation for that and give permission to the various theologians and eventual natural philosophers and eventually scientists that would follow him, to the point where today the Dominicans and the Jesuits are known more for the people that they have in tech and science than for anything else, because they continued following down this road. Aquinas also takes us deeper into this via negativa, into this letting go and letting be, because he eventually, and he kind of gets this in the Summa Theologica itself, you get to passages where he's just like, I don't know, the mind can't really grasp this, so I don't know it's worth us talking about it. Like, several of the arguments kind of eventually argue their way to that point, but it then becomes important in his theology for us to understand that what we do not say or cannot say about the world or the divine is as important as what we can say. And that's a huge thing. Western theology had kind of lost this, we'll use a big word here, apophatic theology. Apophatic just literally means negative, empty, where you're talking about the things that you can't say, and you're realizing your own limitations in being able to talk about things, is kind of this linchpin here. And he is kind of, to me, part of a dyad, because we don't tell our history in sync, but Aquinas is doing this in connection to what Bonaventure is doing in the Franciscan order, just like Dominic and Francis paralleled each other. We have this same parallel in the Dominican and the Franciscan movement with what Bonaventure is doing as well. Two different roads heading in the same direction, and it's kind of fascinating to see. It's hard to teach this apophatic theology, this what we cannot say, because it feels to people who don't understand the limits of our knowledge that we're saying that this is for both. It sounds to some people like we're saying, oh no, you just don't cross that line because there be dragons. And it's not there be dragons. Well, you might try to interpret them as dragons. Beyond this point, your words will fail you. Your words will only scratch the surface, if even that, of what you experience on the other side. And Aquinas really eventually found that out for himself when he had his full on vision and mystical experience himself. One of the biggest elements Aquinas takes from Paul that we were talking about yesterday is this idea of the cosmic Christ. The Christ, the Logos, is this unifying force in the universe, because Aquinas takes Paul at his word that the Christ is the one that maintains and sustains and holds the universe together. And he builds onto that. Christ, he says, is the center of the cosmos and history, that we cannot understand the universe without understanding that. And this is where he gets really misinterpreted by folk like G.K. Chesterton, who then was like, well, if you're not talking about Jesus, you're not talking about history. That's not what he said. And that's definitely not what he meant. One of these days, we may do an episode where I just rant about G.K. Chesterton for 30 minutes, but that's not today. I need to take a deep breath.
Let us know in the comments.
Oh, there's so much I could say about that man. I have feelings that, I have feelings.
Get your preacher back out.
It really does. But when we start looking for that cosmic Christ in all things, bringing that unity and wholeness to all things, that's what he's talking about here. That it's not that if you don't have Christian theology, you'll never understand history. It's that history is this kind of dialectic of sin and atonement, of doing something wrong and redemption, of rebellion and reinvention, of tragedy and triumph. All those things that Christ kind of holds together, that is history. And you have to kind of see it in that light instead of, as others would later advocate, as like this great man history, where it's look at this one great person after another great person and not see the struggle and the strife behind all of the glory and the winning. For us today, the two, I think, biggest lessons that we can glean from Aquinas is one, if you have curiosity, follow it. Aquinas had a very questioning mind. And the form of scholasticism that he practiced is literally learning to debate yourself, because you pose a question and then an answer, and then you debunk your own answer, and then you try to answer the original question again. And you kind of repeat that process until you've exhausted all of the objections that you can come up with. I mean, this is somebody really trying to get to the bottom of a thing, because he goes in hard on some of his own opinions, and he goes in pretty hard on the opinions of some other people too. But he doesn't just come up with an idea and say, aha, got it. No, his first obligation was to tear that idea apart and go deeper and go deeper and go deeper and to keep finding that path forward. And we see him living up to the pinnacle of this at the end of his life when he does have his mystical experience. And I've seen various accounts of this experience, and none of the ones that I have ever read have been from Aquinas's own hand in a way that made me feel like I could talk about it, because he was very clear that it was an experience beyond words, that it was just so profound that he couldn't really describe what happened. If I had to read into it, I would say he definitely had an experience of ego death, which, if you've never had that happen to you, is a shockingly horrifying experience. It's even hard to describe.
To continue off of what we were talking about yesterday, I like to think of it in the way that he had kind of that Merkava dissension, where instead of going up and answering the secret name for each of the angels, he just questioned his way through each one as he got further and further down, questioning his way through each one, until eventually that final experience was when he got to, and he was sat upon the throne and given the name. And it was so profound that he did not have words for it. That's
Which
kind of
is
my head
as
canon of, which still kind of works though, in a way, especially with his process.
because you have to remember, anytime somebody expresses a vision to you, it is metaphor. It's their brain, even if they're 100% sure that that's what they saw. That's how their brain interpreted this profound experience. The greatest gift that Aquinas gives us is, unlike the rest of his life, where he just wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. Like, one of the most amazing stories I've ever heard about Aquinas is he would sit in a circle of about 5 different scribes, and he would dictate part of a book to one, while they were writing that down, he would turn to the next one and tell them a different part of the book. And then he would go to the next one and the next one and the next one. And by the time he got back to the first one, they were done writing the last thing that he told them. And he was telling them the next part, because that's how his brain worked. He was working through so many ideas and thoughts that he could dictate basically 5 different arguments at the same time to 5 different scribes and not lose his place in any of the arguments. This is a man who questioned everything. And if you imagine having so much that you're trying to say that you're literally dictating to 5 different people fast enough that by the time you get back to the first one, they just finished writing what you told them and are ready to write the next part down. This is a lot.
Yeah, it really demonstrates a capacity. If someone were to say, well, maybe you don't have the capacity to write down what the experience was, he definitely demonstrated having a massive capacity to put into words thoughts and experiences. And that's why I like thinking of this as, and this was part of the profound choice to go, this needs that moment of silence, that moment of letting go, that via negativa, just going, no, there was this experience, and then letting the listener fill in what they need to fill in.
Which had to take a lot on his part, not to
Oh,
like, just
yeah.
the humility that he gained from this experience to realize I can't put this in words.
Yeah,
I,
me in a way, it's part of the proof of the validation of the experience itself, because it shows such profound growth, sudden growth in somebody who, once again, had so much to say on everything, just being silent, just exercises that humility. It's like, wow. I would have actually gone so far as been like, that's a miracle right there.
Oh,
The
that's
miracle.
definitely. That's
Anybody who has
definitely.
somebody in their life that likes to talk a lot about stuff, you give them a thing and they'll go on and on and on about it. Could you imagine giving them something that gets them excited and they literally are just like, they give you one sentence or half a sentence, a very short sentence, and that's it.
I have people in my life that are very irritated with me because I've been open about the fact that I've had several mystical experiences throughout my life. I've been blessed that way or cursed that way, depending on your point of view. And y'all know I like to talk. I mean, hello, this podcast and everything else that I do. I mean, it's very clear that I like to talk. When I get questions about them, I'm just like, it was astounding. It was profound. Well, what happened? Everything. Nothing. Can you go into more detail? No. But you're a writer. Yes. You write like sci-fi fantasy books with all this inexplicable crazy stuff in it. Like, yes, yes, I do. Now explain what you saw. I can't. I think it's either some kind of false humility or that I'm just, no, if you've ever had those kinds of experiences, there aren't words. Like we've made up words like ego death, which I've used just a while ago, right? But how do you explain to somebody the visceral sensation of no longer being a separate self? Like, imagine like all the limits that you have on you as an individual identity are just gone. They're just gone. And you can't tell where you start and stop and where everything else is. And you can't tell if that was a moment or an eternity. And you're experiencing other things while you're in that state. I don't know how to put words to it. Like the words that I just did are just inadequate, right? But that's the brilliance of Aquinas is he didn't struggle and pretend. He just let it be what it was, which is one of the greatest lessons of the Via Negativa. And it's the one that we forget so often. Like that's what let it be means. Sometimes you just got to let it rest. Like there's nothing you can add or take away. Like it is what it is. And that's a hard lesson to learn. But in everything that we are doing, I think it's important for us to reconnect to the basic heart of Aquinas's teachings, which is having this deep connection to the fact that we can learn from nature. We can read the book of creation, that we can have this connection to this cosmic Christ that holds the entire universe together and is also there with us in the moment. And I think that that is profoundly beautiful experience. Once you've been a Christian of any stripe for any period of time, you start taking for granted, and you shouldn't. Learning to live with wonder, humility, and love. That's really the lessons we should be taking away from Aquinas. So the question is, how are you going to reimagine or re-encounter this great mystic and theologian? I do highly recommend Matthew Fox's book, The Tao of St. Thomas Aquinas, because it is a profound way to re-enter these mysteries in a way that can, if you're not used to reading a scholastic, they can be very dense and hard to read. Matt does a very good job of helping walk you through a lot of Aquinas's thought processes in that book. And I think that it's a great way, a great place to get started. But even more than that, I think one of the best ways to, I don't know, honor Aquinas or to connect to the work that he did is just be inquisitive. Have that curiosity about the world around you and never let yourself stop learning and always realize, like he did, that you don't know everything and to have that humility to admit when you thought you knew more than you did and you found out you are wrong. I hope that you've enjoyed this episode. We talk about whether or not to do some of the Saints episodes because they don't tend to do that well on the platforms, but I have a deep and abiding love of the Saints, so I push for them to be on the calendar anyway. So I hope that this has meant something to you. I would love to know in the comments what your connection, if you have one, with Aquinas is. And his book confused me as a perfectly valid to that question because the Summa Theologica it's dense. It is dense. But I'd love to know, just beyond that, how how do you actually practice what he preached? How do you connect to nature? How do you find ways to study the world with fresh eyes and explore your own profoundly mystical experiences that you have with it, even if it's just getting lost in the beauty of a flower? If you're listening to us on YouTube or Spotify, you can leave a comment right there. If you're listening to us anywhere else, even if they say you can leave a comment, they don't let us know. So you leave a comment there anyway, because engagement is magic. And then head over to creationpaths.com and click on chat. And there you can leave us a comment and we will see it and be able to get back to you. While you're there, if you happen to have a few dollars you can pass our way, we offer monthly and annual memberships. You can also support us on Patreon and Ko-fi. I am CE Dorset on both. Thank you to everybody who does that. You really do help us keep the lights on, keep a roof over our head, and food on our tables. And if you don't have anybody right now, or if you're not sure that we're the kind of people that you want to give your hard-earned treasure to, that's perfectly all right and valid. But if we've done anything that you have enjoyed and you think other people might like, or that might help them, please share it with them, because that is really why we do this, to help others. So as we're coming to a close, let's say a sweet and simple prayer to St. Thomas Aquinas. Oh, St. Thomas, so often misunderstood because of the depth of your thinking and the profundity of your life. You've discovered the great secret that all things are drawn to the divine source. So help us to see that source in all things so that we might read the book of creation with the same relish and joy that you did. Amen.
Amen.